Welcome back to Business Office Specialist. In today's video, we're going to be looking at some of the graphic object features that are available inside of Google Docs. For this project, we're going to begin with a blank document. So let's go to our boss folder and open that so that we can create this document inside that boss folder already. Go to New up in the upper left and choose a Google Doc. So now we have a blank document to work with. We're going to rename this document Street Signs Poster. So the project we're going to be working on today is going to build a poster. For our example today, we're going to build a poster that shows some of the common street signs. This could be something you might find in like a driver's education course or something like that. To begin the project, I'd like to look at some of the page setup features that might be handy when creating a poster. So page setup is located under the File menu right here in the upper left. If we click on that and go all the way to the bottom, we will see page setup. So one of the things that we might want to change with a poster is the orientation of the page. So orientation is the way that the page is turned. If the page is turned straight up and down so that the longest sides of the paper are on the left and right, that is called portrait. If you turn the document sideways so that the longest sides are top and bottom, that is called landscape. These two terms were taken from the art world. So in the art world, when you're taking a picture of or painting an image of a person, oftentimes we have a tall image because we want to get their entire body in there. So when we think of a portrait, we think of things that are tall. If you think of a landscape, when you're taking a picture or painting a landscape, we like to have a wide image so that we can get the entire sweeping landscape in that single shot. So that's why we use those terms portrait and landscape. Again, portrait is straight up and down with the tallest sides on the left and right, and landscape is wider with the longest sides on the top and bottom. For this poster, I mean, honestly, I've seen posters either way. You could have a portrait or a landscape. For this poster, we're going to choose landscape. The other thing that we can do is alter the margins. So margins, if you remember, are the white spaces around the edge of the document that aren't used. In standard MLA format and many other formats as well, the margins are typically 1 inch on all sides. For a poster, though, we can stretch it a little wider to give us more space to work with. So we're going to make smaller or narrower margins for our poster. We're going to bring this down 1/2 inch to just 1/2 inch margins on all sides. I wouldn't get smaller than 1/2 inch because once you get smaller than that, sometimes the printers don't have the ability to print that close to the edge of the paper, and so your print won't look right, or the printer will fail and send you an error message because it can't print the entire document. So 1/2 inch is probably the smallest I would go. That's where we're going to go with this poster today. The other thing that we can do is change the background color on the page itself. So right now the background color is white, which makes sense for most documents. So if we're making a graphic item like a poster or a flyer or something like that, we might want to change that background color to something a little brighter and more interesting that might pop out. So I'm going to come in here and change this. For ours today, since the signs themselves are going to be bright and catch attention, I'd like the background just to be a darker color. So it really makes those signs stand out as the thing that grabs people's attention. So I'm going to do a dark blue number 3, which is right down here. So when I'm asking for colors, or when you're looking for a very specific color name, if you hover your mouse over them, it will give you the name. So we're going to go all the way to the bottom to dark blue number 3. And then if I click OK, that's going to create our dark background, and that looks great. Now, one thing to note, if you're doing dark colors on a poster like this, you don't want to typically print them, because when you print something like this out on a normal printer, especially an inkjet printer, it's going to saturate the paper in ink. It's going to take up a lot of ink unnecessarily just to get the entire page that one color. So we don't typically want to do that with printed items. But if it's a digital poster, this would work great. So now that we have the background in there, let's start looking at some of our graphic objects. The first graphic object I want to look at is called word art. Word art basically is when the software takes words and turns them into art. Or in other words, you're taking text that you normally write and converting it into a graphic object so that you can make changes to it, like moving it freely around the screen, changing the colors, shading, special effects, things like that you would normally do to a shape, image, or other graphic object. Now, if you're familiar with using something like Microsoft Word or other word processing systems, the graphic object items like word art are found on the ribbon inside the software. With Google Docs, it's a little different. Most of your graphic objects are not actually found inside of Google Docs themselves. They're found in a separate tool that's built into Google Docs called the Drawing tool. So to open the Drawing tool, we need to go to Insert and add a new drawing. So Insert is on your menu right here. If I come up and click on Insert, you can see the third option down is Drawing. And I'm going to click New. That opens a separate window with this multicolored grid that helps me see the area that I'm going to be creating in. They call that the drawing canvas. So in our canvas, I would like to create a word art. If we go to Actions on the menu, there's an option for word art. Now the first thing it's going to do is ask us to type in the words that we would like to convert into a graphic object. For this, let's use the word art to create our title for this document. We're going to call this poster Common Street Signs. So I'm going to write Common Street Signs here. If I wanted to have multiple lines inside of my word art, I can press Shift and Enter, and that will move to a new line. If you press Enter, it will save this and turn it into a graphic object. Since this is all we're going to do, I'm going to press Enter, and now I have my graphic object. And you can see that instead of clicking it and moving my mouse where I can type, it's actually treating all of these letters as if they were an image or shapes. And I can move them freely around on the screen if I want to. And they act just like a graphic object. I can squish them like I would a picture or resize them using all of the little squares around the edge. So now I've taken this text and made it an image. Well, let's do some work with this. I would like to change the color on it. So just like with any other shapes or graphic objects, you can change the colors on word art. They have two different colors that we really focus on. One color in graphic objects is called the fill color. The fill color is what you fill in inside of the borders around the edges. So that's the blue color that you see in the middle of all of our letters. The fill color icon on the menus is typically a bucket in most word processing systems, and it is here in Google Docs. So if I come up to the bucket, I can change the fill color. For this, let's change it to white. Now I'd also like to change the color of the borders around the edges. The borders is the little pencil icon that's right next to the bucket. So I'm going to click that to change the border color. Let's make this yellow. Now, that makes this really hard to see right now. But that's okay because we're just in the canvas right now, and the canvas has a very light background, so this yellow and white is hard to see. But as soon as we save and close this, it will put it on our dark background that we created a minute ago, and then it will get easier to see. The last thing I'd like to do with this is change the border width. So borders and lines that you use for drawing shapes and things like that are all measured in what's called a pixel. Pixels are the tiny little dots of color that are all over your screen that help make the images on your screen appear. So all of your images are made up of teeny tiny little dots called pixels. These lines are measured by how many pixels thick they are, how many pixels we're using to create the thickness of the line. Right now, by default, this is a 1 pixel line. It's very, very thin. We'd like to make them thicker. So the 3 lines that are right to the right of the border color right here are the thickness of your borders. So if I click on that, that's called a border weight. You can see the different pixel settings. So right now we're 1 pixel. I'd like to make these 4 times bigger than they are right now, so I'm going to choose 4 pixels. And that makes it really bold and really bright. Let's save and close this and put this on our poster and see what it looks like. All right, so that almost glows with how bright it is, but that's okay because I want to attract a lot of attention with this poster. Now, what I'd really like to do is move this so it's right in the center of the poster. However, if I click to drag on this, you can see it's being stubborn. It does not want to move. Oop, I just reopened it. That's because it is anchored in place. So by default, when graphic objects are created, they are anchored to a specific location on the page, meaning that they will not move unless the text around it moves. To unlock this, we can use a tool called text wrapping. Text wrapping is normally used to help wrap the text you're writing around a graphic image so that the graphic image takes up less space in the document and the text can kind of flow around and to the side of the graphic object. That's the main purpose for text wrapping. For what we're doing in class today, though, it's also a handy tool to unanchor a graphic object so that it can freely move around the page. So right below the graphic object in Google Docs, there are these little boxes and lines. These are explaining your text wrapping settings. Right now, we have inline. We would like to move it to wrap text. Once we click wrap text, this image can now move freely around my document. So if I click common street signs, I can now drag it anywhere I want. I would like it to be exactly in the middle of the page, and Google Docs can help us with that. As I drag this towards the middle, you'll see a red line appear right in the center. That red line tells me that the center of my graphic object is exactly in the center of the page. So I'm perfectly centered right now. There are some other red lines that can be useful as well. If I drag this towards the top, you'll see a red line come across the top of the screen. That red line tells me that I'm right up against the margin of the page. I don't want to go over that red line, or what I'm putting there may not print. But I can hug right up against the margin by stopping right at that red line. So now I'm as high as I can go and directly center. That's perfect. Now the next thing I'd like to do is create one of our signs. The signs we're going to create today are going to use shapes to help us with that. A shape is another kind of graphic object. So just like word art, the shape is in the drawing app in the Insert tab. So we're going to go to Insert on the menu, and you can see right now that my drawing app is grayed out. I can't click on it. That's because I currently have another graphic object selected. In order to go back to the drawing app, I have to unselect this graphic object. To do that, all you have to do is click in some empty space outside of the graphic object itself. So if I click off here to the side, common street signs border goes away, and that tells me that I've stopped selecting it. Now I can go back to Insert, and the drawing app is available to me. So if you're trying to do this at home and you're frustrated because you can't click on the drawing app, that's probably because you have a graphic object selected. Deselect that, and you can come into the menus and access the drawing app again. So I'm going to create a new drawing. For this one, let's create a stop sign. Stop signs are an octagon. We can find octagons in our shapes. The shape icon on the menu is a circle on top of a square. It's right here. So if I come and click on shapes, there's several different options that we have available. We have traditional shapes, arrows, callouts that are like thought bubbles and comment boxes, and equations, mathematical items. So when we think about traditional shapes, we're usually thinking about things like squares, circles, triangles, and octagons. But there's a lot of other things that are in the traditional shapes menu as well. You have things like smiley faces, hearts, suns, clouds, all kinds of cool things that you can use to create really interesting looking posters and other graphic documents. For ours today, we're going to create a stop sign. That's an octagon. It has 8 sides. So I'm going to come over here to the 8-sided item, or the octagon. Click on that, and it changes my mouse to a crosshair, or a plus sign. That tells me that it's waiting for me to click and drag to create the shape. So I'm going to come to one side of the document here, click, and while holding down my mouse, I'm going to drag. And you can see as I drag, it creates a little blue outline that tells me what the shape is going to look like when I'm done. So I can make this shape literally any size or width or height that I want to, and it's going to create it when I release my mouse. For this one, we want this octagon to be roundabouts 18 grid squares in height and width. So you can use these little gray and white squares in the background of the canvas to measure the size of your items to help get them about the size you want. So I don't expect you to go in and just count every single one of these, but roundabouts 18 grid squares, high and wide, should be enough. That's going to take us to about here-ish. I think about here-ish looks good. So I'm going to release my mouse, and it's going to create that octagon for me. Now, stop signs have text in them. They say stop. So we want to add text into this. So we're going to turn this octagon into a text box. A text box is just a shape you put text in. Oftentimes they call them a text box because they're usually square, but they don't have to be. Any shape can be a text box. So we're going to turn this octagon into a text box. I can do that by double-clicking inside the fill area. When I do that, it opens up a cursor, and now I can type. So I'm going to type stop. Now, this doesn't look very much like a stop sign because the stop is all the way off to the left-hand side. It should be centered. So let's use some of the tools we've learned already to center this text. The alignment and many of the text-related icons are here in the drawing app, but we can't see them. They're hidden right now. The 3 dots at the far side of the menu would allow us to see the rest of the ribbon and the features that we're looking for. So once we click more, then our alignment is right here. We'll center align, and then let's do some more stuff to this. Let's make the text bolder and maybe increase its size. Let's go all the way to 36 points. That's starting to look better. And let's pick a more stop sign looking font. Let's use Verdana. There we go. That's a little thicker font than what we were using before. That looks more like a stop sign. But of course, the color still doesn't look right. Stop signs in the United States are not blue. They're red. So just like with our word art before, we can change the fill color and the outline color. Let's change the fill to be a bright red, like a stop sign. And our border color, let's make it white. Now, it's given us a very thin 1 pixel border, just like it did with the word art, but many stop signs have a thick white border around the edge that kind of catches your attention of this stop sign as you're approaching it. So let's change the border width and make it really thick. Let's make it like a 16 pixel line. There we go. That's starting to look more like a stop sign. So I can save and close this. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's change the font color while we're here too. That font color shouldn't be black. That's probably white. So let's make that. That looks so much better. There we go. All right, that looks like a stop sign now. So let's save and close. And there's my stop sign. Now I'd like the stop sign to be on the right side of the page. So again, if I try and click and drag this, it's not going to move. It's still anchored. So I need to come down to the bottom, click wrap text, and that will unlock the image so that I can now move it to the right. Let's put it underneath the word art and go right up against the right margin. And you can see, just like with the top margin, when I approach the right margin, it will give me a red line to tell me that I'm right at the edge of the margin. So that gives us our first sign and introduces us to word art and shapes, 2 of the common graphic objects for word processing systems like Google Docs. Now, if you are doing this assignment for my Canvas course, there are 3 more signs that I would like you to create using the same tools that we've just explored together in this class. So take a look at Canvas, follow the instructions, and create those last 3 signs. As a quick review, we've learned to create word art, which is just taking text and converting it into a graphic object. We've learned how to create some shapes. We've learned how to change the border colors and the fill colors of those objects, and also learned how to use text wrapping to move them freely around the screen. To learn more tools and features in the Google Suite family of apps, check out more of my videos on YouTube or visit torinorman.com.